I'm about to tell you about a man who spent 3 years fighting to keep a house, and lost the daughter who had been quietly trying to keep a family. Before I get into it, I want to ask you something. Leave your answer in the comments. What's the one thing a parent can give their child that no amount of money can ever replace? The house on Clearwater Drive had been in the family for over 20 years. My mother had chosen it herself, driven out on a Saturday morning with the real estate agent, while my father stayed home watching the game, convinced nothing in their price range would be worth getting off the couch for. She called him from the driveway of that house, and I'm told he could hear something in her voice he hadn't heard in a while. They signed the papers together 3 weeks later. I grew up in that house. I learned to ride a bike on that driveway. I did homework at the kitchen table while my mother cooked, and my father complained about traffic. There were arguments in that house, and there were Sunday mornings that made up for all of them. It wasn't perfect. No house ever is. But it was ours. My mother's name was on the deed. My father's too. That detail would matter later in ways none of us could have predicted. She passed away 2.5 years ago. Not slowly. Not with warning, an aggressive cancer that moved faster than the doctors said it would. By the time we understood what we were facing, we had maybe 4 months left with her. We used them well. I'm grateful for that. After the funeral, after the casseroles stopped arriving, and the relatives went home, and the house got very, very quiet, I stayed. I was 29 years old, working remotely as a paralegal, and I told myself I was staying because my father needed someone nearby. Grief does strange things to people. I wanted to give him time. What I didn't expect was what grief would reveal about him. It started small. He began talking about the house the way people talk about something they're already planning to sell. Casual comments at first. The yard's getting to be too much work. The neighborhood's changed. Your mother always wanted to downsize anyway. I let them pass. He was grieving. People say things. Then one afternoon, about 6 weeks after the funeral, he placed a folder on the kitchen table in front of me. Inside was a document I didn't recognize. A form related to my mother's estate, something about transferring her interest in the property. I need you to sign this, he said. I looked at it. What is it? It's just paperwork to settle things. The lawyer says it needs both of us. I asked to read it first. He said there was nothing complicated about it. I said I'd still like to read it. He pulled out a chair, sat down, and looked at me the way he used to when I was 16 and arguing about curfew. Your mother would want this handled quickly, he said. She hated loose ends. I didn't sign anything that day. Over the following weeks, the folder reappeared, sometimes with different documents inside, sometimes with a pen already sitting on top of it. My father never raised his voice during those early conversations. He was patient in the way people are patient when they're certain they'll eventually get what they want. I wasn't certain of anything yet, but something about his urgency made me uneasy. 2 months after my mother died, I was organizing her home office. She'd kept every piece of paper she'd ever received, which meant the filing cabinet took the better part of a weekend, when I found a folder tucked behind a row of old tax returns. Inside was a copy of the original deed for the house on Clearwater Drive. I almost put it back without really looking at it. I'm glad I didn't. My mother's name was listed as the primary purchaser, not joint, not equal primary. She had contributed the majority of the down payment from an inheritance she'd received before she and my father married. My father's name appeared on the document, but the legal structure was more complicated than either of them had ever explained to me. I sat on the floor of her office for a long time. When I brought it up with my father that evening, he barely looked up from the television. That's an old document, he said. Things have been updated since then. The lawyer is handling it. Which lawyer? Our lawyer, the estate lawyer. Don't worry about it. I worried about it. The following week, without telling my father, I booked a consultation with a different real estate lawyer, someone recommended by a colleague at the firm where I worked. I brought the deed and everything else I'd found in my mother's office. The lawyer, a woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a very calm way of delivering difficult information, spread the documents across her desk and reviewed them carefully. Your mother held a significant legal interest in this property, she said. When she passed, that interest became part of her estate. She looked at me over the tops of her glasses. Under Ontario law, you're named as a beneficiary. You have rights here that your father cannot override unilaterally. I asked her what that meant practically. It means, she said, that he cannot sell this property, refinance it, or transfer full ownership without your agreement. He needs your signature, and you are under no legal obligation to give it. I drove home that afternoon with my hands very steady on the wheel and my thoughts moving in 100 directions at once. I didn't tell my father what I'd learned. I filed the lawyer's card in my desk drawer and went back to making dinner like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I just wasn't sure yet what to do about it. For the next several months, I stayed in that house and I watched my father carefully. I watched him the way you watch someone you love, who is doing something you don't understand yet, with patience, and with hope that you'll eventually see something that makes it make sense. What I saw instead was a man who had decided that grief entitled him to something, not comfort, not time, something with a dollar value attached to it. He spoke to the neighbors about the market. He had a real estate agent over for coffee one afternoon when he thought I was at the library. I came home early and caught the tail end of the conversation. He made calls behind closed doors. He stopped asking me to sign and started assuming I would. I kept a notebook. I wrote down dates and conversations and things he said that didn't quite add up. Not because I was building a case. Because I needed to understand what was happening in my own home. I also quietly began making arrangements for myself. There's a woman I work with. She's been at the firm for 15 years and has seen every variation of family conflict that estate law produces. Over lunch one day, I told her what was happening at home. Not all of it. Enough. She listened without interrupting, which is rarer than it sounds. You know what you need to do, she said when I finished. I did know, I just hadn't wanted to admit it yet. That same week, I signed a lease on a one-bedroom apartment in Kitchener, 40 minutes away. I paid first and last month's rent with money I'd been setting aside for over a year. Savings from my salary that my father didn't know about and had never asked about. I moved a single carload of things over on a Tuesday afternoon when my father was at a doctor's appointment. My coffee maker. My grandmother's quilt. The photograph of my mother from the summer we drove to Cape Breton. A box of books. The apartment was small and the radiator made a noise I never fully got used to. But I paid for it myself. And when I stood in the middle of that empty little living room on the first night, the quiet felt entirely different from the quiet on Clearwater Drive. That house had the silence of two people with nothing left to say to each other. This apartment had the silence of someone who had finally, after years of holding her breath, exhaled. I didn't tell my father I'd moved anything. I kept coming home for dinners. I kept appearing at the kitchen table. I kept being the daughter he expected to eventually wear down. He never noticed the quilt was gone from my bed. He never noticed the books missing from my shelf. He never asked where I went on Tuesday afternoons. He stopped seeing me clearly a long time before he stopped seeing me at all. The night it finally broke open, I was eating leftover soup at the kitchen table when he came in and set the folder down in front of me. The same folder. Newer documents inside, but the same intention. I need this done, he said. The agent says spring is the right time to list. We're running out of time if we want to catch the market. I'm not signing it, I said. I had said versions of this before, but this time I said it without any softness around the edges, not because I was angry, because I was done pretending that my discomfort was something that could be negotiated away. His face shifted. Something behind his eyes tightened. You don't understand what you're doing, he said. This house is mine. I've lived here for 20 years. Your mother is gone. It's time to move on. You can move on, I said. You don't need to sell the house to do that. He pushed back from the table. I have been more than patient with you. I know. You are making this harder than it needs to be. I know that too. The words he said next came out loudly enough that I heard them settle into the corners of the room and stay there. Then get out. If you won't sign, you don't get to live under this roof. This is my house and I want you gone by morning. I waited for the wave of devastation to hit. It didn't come. What came instead was something quieter, a recognition. The kind that arrives when something you've been bracing for finally lands and you realize you were more ready than you thought. I stood up. I folded my napkin. I pushed in my chair. Okay, I said. I walked upstairs. In my old bedroom closet, behind my winter coats, there was a bag I had packed 3 weeks earlier. Not for drama. Not because I was certain this moment would come, but because I had learned, over the past 2 years, that it was better to be prepared than to be caught off guard by someone you love. I picked up the bag. I came back downstairs. My father was standing in the hallway. He looked at the bag. Something passed over his face. You were already packed, he said. It wasn't really a question. I didn't answer. I said goodnight. And I walked out the front door of the house on Clearwater Drive for what I somehow knew would be the last time I left it as my home. The drive to Kitchener took 40 minutes. I played the radio quietly and didn't cry until I was on the 401 and then only for a few minutes. I was sad. I was also, beneath the sadness, something I hadn't felt in 2.5 years. I was free. My father did not sleep that night. I know this because he left me 4 voicemails between midnight and 4 in the morning, not apologizing, not at first, but assuming. Assuming I'd panicked, assuming I had nowhere to go. The voicemails got shorter and more uncertain as the night went on. The last one, at 4:17, was just his voice saying my name and then a long silence before he hung up. I listened to them the next morning, sitting at my kitchen table with coffee, before I went to work. I didn't call back. What happened next, I learned in pieces from the neighbor 2 doors down. A woman my mother had been friends with for years, who still sent me the occasional text message just to check in. She told me my father had spent the following day in the house, not sleeping, not eating much, just moving from room to room. He'd called the estate lawyer that afternoon. She didn't know what was said, but whatever it was, he wasn't happy when he got off the phone. I can imagine what the lawyer told him. I know, because I had already spoken to my own lawyer about it. My mother's interest in the property had passed to me as a named beneficiary in her will. The will had been filed with the court. There was nothing informal or disputed about it. My father had known about the will. He had attended the reading. He had apparently chosen to believe that if he moved quickly enough and pressured me long enough, the legal reality would somehow stop mattering. It mattered. Without my signature, the house on Clearwater Drive could not be sold, could not be refinanced, could not be transferred. I held a legal interest that could not be wished away or yelled away or waited out. My father spent the better part of 3 days calling lawyers. I know this because my colleague at the firm, the one who had listened over lunch, heard about it through a mutual contact in the local legal community. He called 4 different real estate lawyers in the region. Every one of them told him the same thing. He called me on the 4th day. I let it go to voicemail. The message was different from the ones he'd left before. He didn't assume anything this time. He didn't tell me I was being dramatic or difficult or that I didn't understand. He just said, "I think I need to talk to you. I made a mistake. Please call me back." I sat with that message for a long time. I replayed it twice. Not because I was looking for something hidden in it, but because I wanted to understand what had changed. Whether it was genuine, or whether it was just fear wearing the costume of remorse. I didn't call back that night, or the next day. On the 5th day after I left, I drove back to Clearwater Drive in the late afternoon, before my father got home from wherever he'd been. I used my key. I went upstairs to my old bedroom and retrieved the last few things I'd left behind. Some documents I'd stored in the closet, a journal, a small cedar box that had belonged to my grandmother. When I opened the closet, I realized my father had been in the room. The boxes I'd left on the shelf had been moved. The folder I kept tucked in the back corner, the one with copies of all the legal documents and my own handwritten notes from the past 2.5 years, had been pulled out and left on the bed. He had read it. All of it. I sat down on the edge of the bed and looked at the folder. I thought about him sitting in that same spot, reading page after page of the record I'd kept. The dates, the conversations, the things I'd found, the steps I'd taken, the notes I'd written to myself in the months after my mother died, when I was trying to figure out what was happening and what I should do about it. One of those pages was not really a legal note at all. It was something I'd written late one night about 6 months in, when I was missing my mother and angry at my father and uncertain about everything. Just my own thoughts, in messy handwriting, about why I was still there. I keep thinking about what Mom would say. She wouldn't tell me to fight him. She wouldn't tell me to give in, either. She'd probably make tea and say something that sounded simple but wasn't. I'm staying because I think there's still something here worth protecting. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not ready to give up on him yet. He had read that. And whatever happened in him when he read it, I wasn't there to see it. I took the folder. I took my grandmother's cedar box. I let myself out the back door this time, through the garden where my mother used to grow tomatoes, and I drove back to Kitchener. 3 weeks passed. My father left messages that I sometimes listened to and sometimes didn't. He stopped trying to explain or justify and started just asking if I was okay, asking if we could talk, asking once very quietly if I had enough money and if I needed anything. I didn't answer any of them. Not yet. I was not doing it to punish him. I want to be clear about that. I was doing it because I needed to think without his voice in my head. I needed to figure out what I actually wanted, not what I was supposed to want, not what grief or obligation said I should want. What I, at 29 years old, living in my own apartment and paying my own bills and making my own decisions, actually wanted. The law gave me options. I could have held the property interest indefinitely, effectively preventing any sale. I could have forced a partition application. A legal process that would have cost both of us money and time, and would have ended with a judge deciding what happened to the house. I could have demanded compensation for my share. Nobody would have blamed me. I thought about all of those options. I thought about them seriously, the way a paralegal thinks about legal options, not with emotion, but with a clear-eyed assessment of what each one would cost and what each one would produce. And then I thought about the house, the actual house, the driveway where I learned to ride a bike, the kitchen table where my mother taught me to make her jerk chicken, which took 3 attempts and a lot of smoke before I got it right. The garden. The hallway with the light that always buzzed a little before it came on. I thought about what I had actually wanted from the beginning. I had wanted a father who called me on my birthday without being reminded. A father who asked about my work, my friends, my life. A father who, when his wife died, reached for his daughter instead of her estate documents. I had stayed in that house for 2.5 years hoping that grief was temporary, and that the man underneath it was still there. Maybe he was. Maybe he wasn't. Either way, he wasn't something a legal process could give me. I made an appointment with my lawyer on a Thursday morning. I told her what I'd decided. She looked at me for a moment and I could see her choosing not to argue. "Are you certain?" she asked. I said. We drew up a deed of gift. It transferred my interest in the house on Clearwater Drive to my father, unconditional and complete. No payment, no negotiation, no strings. When the documents were ready, I didn't call him first. I had a courier deliver the envelope on a Monday afternoon. Inside was the signed paperwork and a single handwritten note. I wrote 4 sentences, and then crossed out 3 of them. I kept the one that said what I actually meant. I didn't want the house. I wanted a father. I hope you understand the difference. He called me within the hour built. I let it go to voicemail. He was crying, which I had never heard before in my life. Not at the funeral, not during any of the difficult conversations, not once in 29 years. He said my name 3 times. He said he was sorry. He said he didn't deserve the house. He said he didn't deserve a lot of things. I listened to that voicemail sitting on the floor of my apartment with my back against the couch, and I let myself cry too. Not because it was over, because it had taken so long to get there, because my mother had deserved better than what happened to her family after she left it. Because 3 years is a long time to hold on to hope that something will change, and there is a particular kind of grief that comes when you finally stop. He filed the transfer documents himself. He called to tell me when it was done. I answered that call finally, because I figured he was owed one conversation without voicemail. "It's done," he said. "The house is mine." "I know," I said. There was a long pause. "I don't know why I thought that was what I wanted," he said. I didn't have an answer for that, or I had too many, and none of them were kind enough to say out loud. "I'm going to try," he said then. "If you'll let me. I want to try to be better." I told him I heard him. I told him I wasn't ready yet. I told him that wasn't the same as never. I hung up and stood at my kitchen window for a long time, looking out at the parking lot and the bare trees and the gray November sky. It was not a beautiful view, but it was mine. All of it was mine, the apartment, the job, the decisions, the life. Everything I'd built quietly while he was busy fighting for a piece of property. He still lives on Clearwater Drive. He never listed it, as far as I know. The neighbor sends me updates sometimes. That she saw him raking leaves. That he's put a bird feeder up in the garden. That the light in the front hallway finally got fixed. The tomatoes my mother used to grow are gone, but apparently he planted something. She said it looked like it might be garlic. I don't know why that detail made me sit down and put my hand over my mouth for a minute. But it did. We talk now, not often, not easily, but we talk. He has learned to ask about my work, my friends, my life. He doesn't always know what to say. I don't always make it easy for him. We are 2 people who share a loss and a history and very little else right now. But there is a thread between us that neither of us has cut. And some days that feels like enough. I still have the copy of my mother's original deed. It's in the cedar box, with a few other things that mattered. A birthday card she wrote me when I turned 21, a photograph from Cape Breton, a recipe in her handwriting for the jerk chicken. The house is his. It was always going to end up his, I think, if I'm honest about it. Not because the law required it. Because she married him. Because they chose it together. Because however far he fell from the man she loved, he was still the man she loved. But I needed him to understand what he was asking me to give up. Not a property interest. Not a share of an asset. A home. A place where my mother lived and laughed and planted garlic and made jerk chicken and loved us both even when we made it hard for her. He knows now. He knows what it cost. Whether that knowledge does anything useful inside him. Whether it makes him gentler, more present, more honest about what actually matters. I can't control. What I can control is this. I made it out of that house with my dignity intact. I kept my mother's memory out of a courtroom. I made a decision from my own values, not from fear or anger or the need to prove something. Some families break slowly, over years, in ways that nobody announces. And sometimes the bravest thing a person can do is refuse to break with them. I don't regret walking away. I don't regret coming back either. Not all the way back, but far enough to leave a door open. My mother would have made tea. She would have said something that sounded simple but wasn't. I'm still trying to figure out what it was. Before you go, leave a comment. I want to know, has anyone ever made you choose between keeping the peace and keeping your self-respect? What did you do? Share this with someone who needs a reminder that walking away doesn't always mean giving up.